Well, hello everyone, and welcome to my analog shop. So you find yourself owning or operating or in possession of a classic car or classic truck from the 70s and older, and you find out that their fuel is controlled by a carburetor, and you're of the digital fuel injection era, and you're not too up on the operation and characteristics of the venerable old carburetor. So I tell you what, stay tuned, and I'm going to go over some basic carburetor operation, basic theory, and how you can use it to operate your classic car or truck, and find out that it's actually a pretty efficient, economical, and reliable fuel delivery system if set up right. Stay tuned. Let's go over. Now this is the 49-216 with the Rochester B single barrel carburetor that has the manual choke. I'll go over that here momentarily, but I'm going to show you a few more carburetor setups and go over the differences and how they operate. This is a 54 Chevrolet 235 engine. But as you can see, it's got twin carburetors. Now, it didn't come from the factory with twin carburetors, unless you got the Corvette in 53 and 54, which had triple single barrel carburetors. But these are dual two barrel carburetors with automatic chokes, and I'll go over them momentarily. And then we've got this 75 Corvette that has the Quadrajet 4-barrel carburetor, which was made by Rochester and OEM'd to the Chevrolet in those model years. That is the OEM carburetor for this particular engine. And I've got some others I can show you, but for now we'll just go over the basic operation of these. Okay, here on my bench I've just got three examples of carburetors you'll probably run across when you get into these classics. Now, this is a single barrel carburetor, but what makes it different from the one over on that 49 engine is it's got an automatic choke. Now, I'll cover that momentarily. But this is a single barrel carburetor, or single venturi. This is a two barrel, and if you look down in the throat, you could possibly see. Let's get a light, maybe. Well, I don't know, that's too bright. You can probably see the two venturis down there. And this is a 4-barrel. Here's the two secondaries. And these are the two primary barrels. Now, the difference between how you can differentiate between a primary and secondary is the primaries will have a choke plate, whereas the secondaries don't need it, because basically the engine will not use the secondaries in startup or idle or low speed. The only time really the secondaries will kick in is when you floor it or you're at very high RPM. That's when you need the additional fuel. Otherwise, it generally runs off just the primary two barrels. Okay, so let's go over some of the operation. I already talked about the choke, and you can see here's the choke plate. The choke plate is always on the top, okay? Always, all right? And on the bottom, there's your throttle plate, all right? Right here. There's your throttle plate. And let's see if we can get it there in the light. There you go. See, there's your throttle plate. Now, when you press your gas pedal, this is what opens. You see that? See it opening all the way? All right. What that does is it controls the amount of airflow through the carburetor. And by controlling the amount of airflow through the carburetor, it controls the amount of fuel that the vacuum effect pulls along with the air. Okay? So this is the throttle right there. And all carburetors will have a throttle. Now, there are some examples. See, there's your throttle plates there. And if you look here on the 4-barrel, you see there's 4 throttle plates. All right, and these are equal. This is called a square bore because they are equal in size. Now, the Quadrajet that's on that Corvette is called a spread bore because the secondaries are a lot bigger than the primary. And it's primarily due to wanting to get better fuel economy and low speeds and idle. But then when you kick it in, you want that power, it'll open up them secondaries. So anyway, so anytime you press your gas pedal, you're opening the throttle plate on the bottom. All right. Now, how the carburetor works is, I guess I can show a drawing, but this is very basic. So the shape is called a venturi. All right, it's the venturi effect. It's like an hourglass. All right, it's exaggerated hourglass. And when air, all right, well, how the air is being pulled is, of course, by the pistons going down and expanding a space, which lowers the air pressure, and the atmospheric air is going to rush to fill that void. It's going to rush to fill that void to bring it up to atmospheric air pressure. So the air running through the carburetor, through that venturi, at the restriction in the middle, it causes a drastic drop of pressure. All right? Now, again, what happens when you drop pressure is air pressure is going to try to fill that space. Now, you've got what's called fuel bowls. Here's a fuel bowl. And this Holley 4-barrel has dual fuel bowls, but most carburetors only have a single fuel bowl. Fuel bowl is built in here to the front of the carb, right here. And this is the fuel bowl for this single barrel carb. You can pretty much tell where the fuel bowl is located by the fuel inlet. There's a fuel inlet, fuel inlet. You notice this is a double fuel inlet here, but it also feeds fuel to there. All right. So fuel is being pumped. Now we're talking about analog now. We're not talking about electric fuel pump. So there's actually an analog fuel pump that's pumping fuel at about, let's say 5 to 7 psi up to the carburetor, all right? Now, and it's going to fill these float bowls, all right? There's a float inside the carburetor that is used to maintain a proper float bowl level, okay? Now the level is it's important to have a specific level in the float bowl. Not enough, it'll starve the carburetor. Too much, and it'll flood the carburetor. So there is settings when you do a rebuild on what to do, how to set the float bowl. But we're not getting into that. Just know that there's a float that goes up and down, and it pushes up and down on a pintle valve, all right, or a needle valve. And when it goes down, it allows fuel in. When the float raises, because it floats on top of the fuel, it closes that valve off and won't let any more fuel. That's how it maintains the fuel in the carburetor. All right. So, normal operation of a carburetor is there's precision drilled holes, passages in every carburetor, and which allows a specific amount of a fuel air mixture to get into the airstream going into the engine. All right, when you're idling with your your pedal is not pressed down, your throttle plate is almost totally closed, but in all actuality it's cracked open just enough to let some air and fuel through. It needs that air and fuel to flow through so it will form that vacuum that's needed to draw fuel out of the float bowl through what's called a primary jet and then through an idle speed jet. Some don't have idle speed jets, but most do. And then introduces that fuel air just below the throttle plate, and that's how your engine idles. You don't need a whole lot of fuel to idle, and that's how it gets there with the throttle plate. Although it looks like it's closed all the way, it's just barely closed. And they all have an adjustment. You've got an idle speed adjustment, and let's see, on this carburetor, well, somewhere on it. On this carburetor, there's the idle speed adjustment. Right there, okay. And that actually adjusts the throttle to open and close. To crack it, just barely crack it open. And of course, there's the idle speed on the 4-barrel. All right. Now, so with that's the idle basic circuit. So the question everybody has or should know is, how do you start a cold choke carbureted? How do you start a cold engine with a carburetor? Well, that's where your choke circuit comes into effect, and it's only used on a cold engine. So I'm going to cover that. I'll start with covering that over there on the 216, which comes with the manual choke, or came with the manual choke. First off, I'm going to start inside the cab of this 49 Chevrolet truck. And you notice this knob right here with the C on it. That is the choke cable, all right? You pull that knob out, and that controls the choke in the engine compartment. So just know that you've got, with a manual choke, you'll have a manual choke knob or control for it. All right, so now let's go look at the choke itself. All right, now we're over here at this 49 216 engine with the Rochester B manual choke 1-barrel carburetor. All right, and right here, there's the choke plate right there. All right, and this is the control. Right here, if you can see, is where that cable from the cab goes into the engine compartment and connects here, so it can pull this choke open or closed. Okay, you see how it's moving open and closed? Now this this lever right here is connected to the throttle plate down here. Now this is the throttle. Okay, see this here? This linkage goes down and hits a pivot, and it goes into the gas pedal in the cab. There's your throttle, your idle speed adjustment screw. All right here. All right, now see when I lift up on that, that is opening the throttle plate. Okay, opening it. Now what I want you to watch is this lever right here. Okay, now when you pull the choke cable, did you notice how that moved open a little bit? Okay, all right, so there it is. So the choke's closed, and what it's done, it's cracked open the throttle plate a little bit more, so it will get more air fuel through it, which in turn will give more fuel. Okay, so here you got the choke, which in its operation makes the fuel air mixture richer, which is what you need for a cold engine. You need a very rich mixture of fuel air to get a cold engine to start. Conversely, once an engine's warmed up, it needs very little fuel to start and run. Okay, but when it's cold, you've got this choke, and you notice it's kicking open the throttle just a little bit more to give it what's called a fast idle. All right, so that way it won't stall. Once it starts and the idle catches up, what you'll do with a manual choke is, once it starts and starts to run, now it's not going to run real good, even though it is cracked open some. What you want to do is start pushing that choke cable in just a little bit to let more air in. Now if you do too much, it's going to stall. All right, so you find your happy medium. All right, perhaps at about that point. All right, and then once it's run for about a minute or so, you can open it fully open, and then you're ready to go. So that's how the manual choke works. You won't use that choke again because the engine will never get cold enough to warrant it. You can control starting a warmed engine, or an engine even after it's been parked for a couple hours. There's a way to control it without using the choke. So the choke basically is only for an ice cold engine's first start of a day. All right, I touched on the fact that you don't need a choke to start up a previously warmed up engine. I say unless an engine has sat overnight or at least 10 hours or longer, you don't need to reuse a choke to start it back up after you've shut it down, because an engine will maintain heat for hours after you've shut it down. A couple of procedures you can use to restart an engine, and this is how I do it, is if I've only gone in for 10-15 minutes to a half hour, and I come out to leave somewhere, like say I go into a store or I fill up with gas, I'll start it without even touching the gas pedal. 9 times out of 10, if you're set up correctly, it'll start right up, and you wouldn't have needed to added any additional gas to get it to start. Now, if you sat longer than that, it could need a squirt of gas to get started. So at that point, floor it one time and then try to start it and see what happens. If it doesn't catch when that happens, what I do is I'll stop cranking. I'll floor the gas pedal all the way to the floor, start cranking the engine, then I'll slowly start letting it up. And it's going to hit a sweet point, a sweet spot where it'll catch and run. And 99% of the time, if I get to that point, doing that procedure will get it to start. But normally, I don't have to touch the gas pedal on either one of these classics to get them to restart after I've only shut down for between 15 minutes to an hour or so. So anyway, hope that's helpful to you. So, if you're with me to this point, you realize that you need a choke to start an ice cold engine, but you don't need a choke after the fact, all right? And we went over how the manual choke worked. Well, now, these 3 carburetors, all 3 use automatic chokes, and I've upgraded the 49 truck to automatic chokes with those newer carbs, and the choke on the Corvette here, the 75 Corvette, also has a automatic choke. So I'm going to kind of cover a real basic overview of how the automatic choke works. All right. And what you have, this is automatic choke right here. And if you notice, you've got this bimetal spring. All right. Now, how this works is when this spring heats up, it expands. All right. It expands a set amount, and it does it at a specific rate. Okay. That's how they manufacture them. So just keep in mind that the whole operation of an automatic choke depends upon this spring and the rate at which it operates. Now at the front, there's your electrical connection, okay, because it needs to get 12 volt from the electric system of the vehicle to work. And this right here houses a set of contacts and a heating element, okay? So once this, you apply 12 volt to this terminal, it's going to start the heating element. It's going to make this the heater start up and start to heat this plate here that this coil attaches to. Now, once it hits a set temperature to keep from burning out, that contact will open, and then it'll close back. You know, it's not like points, but just know that there's a set of contacts also generally in these that'll open to keep these from burning out. But what happens after so many hundreds of uses or thousands of uses, the contacts can get corroded. They could burn out. The spring could lose its tension. There's a lot of things that can cause these to go bad. They don't go bad as often as you would think, but they do go bad. But just keep in mind that you need 12 volt applied to it only when the ignition key is on. Of course, if you got 12 volt applied to this thing at all times, it's just going to run your battery down, and it's going to also open it to where it's useless in closing the choke. So that is the basic operation of how an automatic choke works. And I'll show you on the carburetor how it connects and how it controls the choke plate. Or I'm going to use the 2-barrel because I've pulled the choke off, and here's the internal setup of the choke of the carburetor. The choke itself will go down like this. All right, now if you notice, this arm moves and it moves the choke plate. All right, so with an ice cold engine, what you want is this choke to be connected down in there. All right, let's put him down, and we want enough tension to close that choke. All right, so let's get him connected. All right, well, that's the wrong choke. He should be on there. All right. All right, now. There. All right, you see, I've got it to where, see, it's spring close. It'll spring close, all right? That's because that coil is ice cold and the carburetor and the engine's ice cold. So normally, when you come up to your engine, the choke is going to be where it left off when you parked it. All right, let's open him back up again. All right, you see he's open. Yeah, although the spring tension is wanting to close it because it's cold, but you see the choke is open somewhat because that's where it's cooled down to that point and it's hit a stop on the linkage. All right, now, well, probably show you better on this one now. All right, so here's your throttle. All right, see the choke's closed. All right, now when I open the throttle all the way, now I'm going to open it all the way. You notice that choke cracks open. All right, you see that? Now it's designed like that, so if you let's say you flood your engine, all right, and which could be from a misadjusted choke, or you got a manual choke, or there's other reasons that can cause a carburetor to present too rich of a mixture to start a warmed up engine, and that's normally when you'll have a flooding type situation. Or another way you can get a flooding type situation is if you come up to a cold engine, the choke's not properly adjusted, and you just keep mashing the pedal. You're mashing the pedal. All right. Now there's a circuit in these carburetors that when you mash the pedal, that sudden drop of pressure is not enough to pull enough fuel to give you that steady increase in RPM, and you get what's called a bog, a hesitation. All right. So all carburetors automotive type carburetors, they implement what's called an accelerator pump circuit. You see that? See that going down? See that going down? What that's doing is that is squirting an additional amount of fuel into this venturi to give enough fuel to overcome that sudden drop of pressure going through the carburetor and allow the engine to accelerate smoothly and properly. All right, so you got your throttle. So if you're sitting there with an engine and you're constantly pumping, what you're doing is you're squirting a lot of fuel into the venturi, and that can cause a flooded condition. In other words, it's too rich, too much fuel, and it will not start the engine. All right, it'll foul out the spark plugs and keep them from the spark from sparking, or the fuel is so rich, there's so much fuel in it that it won't ignite. So You kind of want to avoid doing that unless your choke, if your choke circuit doesn't work, well, that's probably the only way you're going to get it started because you get enough mixture. But again, if you got a properly set up choke circuit, you should not have to do that. Now, generally, now let's use this one again for an example. Open it up. Now, see the choke is at a we're sitting at idle. We're sitting at the engine. This is where when you shut it down the night before, the choke was wide open, of course, when you're driving, and it gets to a point where it won't close all the way. All right, and so you don't have a knob to pull in the cab to set this choke closed, and on an ice cold engine you want that choke to be fully closed. All right, so what you do to do that, of course, now you got spring tension on the automatic choke coil in there that's pulling against, well, I messed it up. You got spring tension that's trying to close this plate, but it's hitting a linkage right here, okay? In this case, that linkage right there, and that's what's keeping the choke from fully closing. So in order to close what's called set the choke, you want to floor your gas pedal. Now, I found that if a engine sits for 3 or more days, you'll want to pump it about 2 or 3 times. Normally, an engine that runs every day that's regularly used, 1 pump should be all you need to set the choke and to squirt that additional amount of fuel in there. But like I say, after 3 or 4 days, 2 to 3 pumps will not only set the choke, so watch the choke plate when I'm going to pump the gas pedal. See? It's set, 2, 3. So that should have gave 3 pumps of additional fuel into that cold engine, and coupled with the choke being closed, all right, and the engine should start. Now, one other thing, automatic chokes, they have a linkage set up sort of like that analog that'll crack that throttle plate open. Now, you can't really tell, but the throttle plate is actually cracked open additionally to get it to fast idle. Now, if you look real hard, you'll see there's steps on this cam. This is called a step cam. All right. Now, once the choke heats up, and see, and you give it gas, you give gas, and the choke heats up. Watch that step cam. You see that? Now the choke's wide open, and now it's at the stop at the regular idle setting. All right. But watch, when I do this, see, it wants to go back because it's cold, all right? So once it warms up and you're driving down the road, all right. Now, what you want to do, all right, so that's the basic operation. So you start your car, it's sitting there idling fast, all right? What I normally do, I'll wait till a couple, maybe 5-10 seconds, and I'll kick it down a little bit. All right, now in that 5-10 seconds, there's been heat applied to this coil, okay, via the 12 volt, and the heat of the engine itself is starting to warm up. And what it'll do, it'll allow the choke to open a little bit more, okay, and what that'll do is it'll go to a lower step on the step cam, and that'll lower the RPM. You kick it down. Now, depending upon the ambient outside temperature, if you're in your 50s or 60s, you know, within a minute, you should be able to kick it all the way down and it be at the regular idle position. The colder it is, means the longer it's going to take this to heat up, to get that choke open, to kick the idle down to regular idle. All right. So, to go over what we just discussed, you walk out to your ice cold engine. Now, if you have the manual choke, floor your gas pedal, and while holding it to the floor, pull your choke out. The reason why I say that allows that step cam, whatever. See that now on the Rochester B, it's not so much important to hold the gas pedal down, but some other one barrel carburetors, it may have to fight against spring tension or something. So hold it down to allow the choke, pull your choke all the way out, and then let your gas pedal up. Okay, so you've gave it a squirt of gas and you've got your choke closed, and you can start it. Now once it starts, it'll run smooth for a second or two, and then it's going to start missing because it wants more air. So you just slowly open that choke till you get a sweet spot and let it sit at that spot, you know. And you can tell by how smoothly the engine is idling. Okay, you are the CPU basically. You are the analog CPU. There's nothing measuring incoming air temperature, nothing measuring outgoing heat temperature. There's nothing measuring the coolant to tell the CPU how warm the engine is. You are the CPU. Okay. So slowly, you'll find your sweet spot. Just slowly push the knob in until you find it smooths out, and leave it there for a moment or two. Now, also with the manual choke, after about a minute or so, you can sometimes you can even close it, depending upon the temperature. You can close it immediately. All right, or I'm sorry, yeah, open it by pushing the knob in, and it'll idle. Now, since the engine itself is not up to its normal operating temperature, it's going to stumble a little bit, and it's going to miss a little bit, but that's all right. The more you can start driving it, and it'll warm up as it goes. Or you can just sit there and let it warm up idling, which is what I do a lot. And then with the automatic chokes, it'll adjust, and then sometimes you've got to kick it down 2 or 3 times, okay? With an automatic choke. With a manual choke, once you move it so far, that lever is out of the picture and you're down to your normal idle. All right. With an automatic choke, if you got a later model, or someone's replaced the carburetor and put an automatic choke in, all right, once the engine starts, all right, the starting procedure I use is 1 or 2 pumps. Depend upon when's the last time the engine ran, okay? That'll set the choke if you got it properly adjusted, and it'll squirt some additional fuel into the carburetor to get it going, all right? Start it, and this step cam is at the high point, and it's going to idle fast between 1,000 and 1,500 RPM, all right? Now what I do is I immediately will kick it down, all right? As soon as it starts and evens out, I'll kick it down. And normally, because of spring tension and heat already being applied, because this heats up, the coil heats up pretty fast, it'll take it down to a lower step on the cam, and you won't idle so fast. I don't like idling real fast on a nice cold engine, so I like to kick it down. And then after a minute or so, depending upon the outside temperature, you kick it down again. Kicking it down, of course, is to floor it real fast. Floor your gas pedal, and it should, once everything's warmed, go to the normal idle, regular idle position. I'm going to demonstrate this, but I wanted to go over it, the basic operation before I actually show it in operation. Another thing to keep in mind, in order for carburetors to work, they have to have the float bowl has got to be vented to atmosphere, all right? Atmospheric air pressure has to be in the float bowl, okay? The reason why is when that low pressure is developed in the venturi inside the carburetor, okay? Which these kind of on the 4-barrel I'll show you, these kind of amplify that venturi effect right here, okay? Because that's your main barrels there. Once you open it up, that's where your main fuel's coming through. All right. Anyway, atmospheric air has got to be inside the fuel bowl with the fuel, because once that air goes through the venturi, the air in the float bowl is going to push, it's going to help push the fuel through the circuits into that airstream to get down into the cylinders. Potential spam. Isn't that something? Trying to sell me insurance probably. So anyway, so you've got to have air. The float bowls are not permanently sealed, hermetically sealed, I guess. There is air pressure. Now, in the very old days, you just had air. See, all these are modern carburetors. So the vents are, they actually do venting, so where they'd go to what's called a charcoal canister to capture the vent. Well, anyway, so venting. So what happens is, since you've got your float bowl vented, all right, you've got atmospheric air in it, the gasoline, the fuel that are in the float bowls will start to evaporate out through those vents. Let's say you park your vehicle out in the heat, or your shop's hot. You know, the hotter the temps, the more quicker the fuel is going to evaporate out of the fuel bowls. And I've discovered with my classics, it only takes 3 to 4 days, and enough of the fuel has evaporated out of the float bowls to where there may not be enough in them to start. Okay? Even with, when you depress the throttle plate, the gas pedal, and you're squirting in the gas, well, there's not enough fuel in the float bowls to squirt that gas in there, okay? Because it's evaporated out. Sometimes it might take a week or more. It depends. Now, if you got if your Classic has a fully functional venting system to a charcoal canister, it won't vent out as fast. But most of us are venting either the straight out to the atmosphere in the air cleaner, or we're going to the charcoal canister and it's just venting out that way. All right. So, and that's because, unfortunately, one of the banes of these old classic engines are vacuum leaks. And the charcoal evap system is a major source of vacuum leaks. So in a lot of cases, they just get bypassed or plugged. You don't vent, you just vent straight out. That's why sometimes you walk in your garage where you got a classic car, you'll smell a gas kind of smell. That's because it's evaporated. So be careful. Keep it well ventilated. Anyway, so why did I bring that up? Well, the problem is, like I said, although you're doing all the procedures to start that ice cold engine correctly, there's no fuel in enough fuel in the float bowl to get gas in the carburetor. So what you're looking at is two things. And you need to either crank your engine over to where the fuel pump will pump enough fuel into the carburetor, and then you can set to go through your starting procedure to start. Or you could do like some people I know. A good friend of mine, he actually wired in an electric fuel pump in series with his mechanical pump, and he uses that to prime his carburetor. He'll give it power, turn a switch, and it'll pump enough fuel to get up into the carburetor. And then he goes through a starting procedure. You can do a parallel kind of setup, or you can do it in series like he did. Well, what I do is I keep my engines and my batteries well maintained, so I know that I'm going to have after they've sat for so long, I know I'm going to have to crank them to get them to start. Now, one thing I don't do, I won't sit there and I won't just, continually pump while it's cranking until it finally gets enough fuel in the float bowl to squirt into it and then go. I don't do that. What I do is I'll just do a couple short cranks to get fuel pumped into the carburetor. About a couple 5-second or so cranks. And I know from my past experience, it only takes about 2 5 to 7 second cranks to get fuel, enough fuel, and it will pump into the carburetor. All right. So then I'd go through my procedure to start, and 9 times out of 10 it will. If it doesn't start, well, crank it a couple more times to get fuel in there. Go through your start procedure again, and away you'll go. Now, your start procedure can vary per engine. Sometimes 1 pump, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, you know. And it may take more than 5 second cranking to get fuel to it. It may take a couple of maybe 2 or 3 10-second cranks to get fuel into it. All right. So, I think I've kind of covered the basic operation. Now, also, before I go over to start, because I'm concentrating a lot on starting. Like I say, most of what you all who are watching this that are wanting to learn more about the analog carburetor, okay, one thing to know, of course, I already touched on the choke. Once the engine's warmed up, the choke's going to be wide open, and it's not a part of the carburetor operation from that point on. Its only use and need is to enrich in the fuel to get an ice cold engine started. After that, it's not needed. Okay. All right. Now, you got various vacuum ports, all right, that are used. Depending upon the year and model, they really, look at here, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's the vent right there for the fuel. That went to the charcoal canister here, okay? But you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 vacuum ports. All right. If a vacuum port is not being used, because in a lot of cases, that vacuum ports were used for small control devices, and most of the time you're going to run into your classic car that those devices have been removed. Okay, unless you're in a state that still requires smog testing. All right, so they've been removed. Always plug an unused, well, the big one is always to, you have a big one going to your PVC or PCV valve, and a big one going to your power brake. So if you got power brake, your big vacuum will go there. Always plug an unused vacuum port. What happens is the vacuum ports are actually, they are precision drilled, and they appear in different sections of the venturi, to where some will give full vacuum all the time. Some will give vacuum only at partial throttle. Some will give vacuum only at idle. Okay, it depends upon how the engineers designed the need for that. They used vacuum back in the day before the electronic and the CPUs came. So vacuum was the main way to control exterior devices. And since they are drilled into the venturi, that's going to be an additional source of air getting sucked into the carburetor that doesn't go through the venturi. Hence, it makes the fuel-air mixture leaner, okay? So you want to hit it what's called a stoic fuel-air ratio of, I think it's 13.7 to 1. In other words, 1 part of fuel to 13.5 or 7 parts of air. When you have an open vacuum tube, you're going to have, that could raise to 20, 25 to 1, and that's too lean, all right? And now your engine's going to sit there, and it's not going to like it, and it's going to idle roughly, okay? Or it's going to stumble, or it's going to have poor fuel economy. So if you're not utilizing any of the vacuum ports, and that's anything like this, sticking out, plug them. They have your flaps, your friendly area neighborhood auto parts store. They have little plug kits. See, there's one right there. Okay, there's the vent right there for the fuel bowl. There's the fuel inlet. That's That's nothing. There's your fuel inlet. So this carburetor, that's funny, this is really pre-emissions because it only has one vacuum, and that'll go to the distributor for vacuum advance. Otherwise, there's no other vacuums on this carburetor. That, like I say, that's the vent. All right. So, not like this. Now, this one probably doesn't have a lot either. Let's see. He's got one here. He's got one here. More than likely, this is for your distributor, and that's was for whatever or if it's an automatic, you got a modulator valve that needs constant vacuum. All right. So I think that kind of covered it. Like I said, this is only basic operation. I don't want to get too deep. You can get into all these subsystems, but to know you need a choke only for cold starting, and I kind of went over how you set it and how to kick it off, and to know that once it runs enough, it will heat up and open fully and not be implemented at all. All right. So now I'm going to show you in operation 2 different automatic choke setups and how I start those engines. All right, I started this engine just yesterday, so it's not going to need a whole lot of pre-pumping to get that carburetor. I know that carburetor's got enough fuel in it. So I'll pull the air cleaner off here so we can see. All right. Now you can see the choke is wide open, all right? Because that's the condition it was in when I left it, all right? Now I can climb in the, here, let's get a close-up of that. I want you to be able to see, all right? See, the choke is wide open, all right? Now, instead of climbing in the car and using, depressing my battery went dead. All right, I'm gonna take this off too. All right, that's not needed, that's part of the air cleaner. That little standoff actually improves, but I won't do it. Okay, instead of climbing inside the car and depressing the gas pedal 2 times, I know from past that I need to do it twice, even though it was started yesterday. So I'm going to just do it by manually doing the throttle. I'm not touching the choke circuit at all. It's all automatic. So we're going to, like we're flooring it twice. 1. Notice the choke closed, all right? And then I'm going to give it one more squirt for good luck. All right, now I'm going to reach in and start the engine. As you see how it stumbled just a little bit, now look how the choke cracked open. And you may not can tell, but it's slowly opening. It doesn't take it long to start opening. All right, now it's at fast idle. I'll take it to the other side. So here's the choke circuit. That is what helped crack it open, because you need to crack it open more in order to get more airflow. Now I'm going to kick it down. But since it's cold, it's not going to kick all the way down. Notice it opened more, it kicked down just a little bit. Now, we're about 42 degrees. It's actually dropped down into 30s last night. So this is an extremely cold engine. It'll take it a little longer in order to warm up enough to kick all the way down to idle. And I know from past experience, it's going to take about a minute or 2. Now, you notice when I kicked it down that one time, it did drop it some in RPM. If we look in, I don't know if you can see, it's about 1,300 RPM. Probably couldn't see it. Now, it may kick down more now that it's had power. Let's see. All right, it still won't kick all the way down yet, but look at the choke. sometimes you just gotta kick it down from inside. There you go. Now, it's still, it'll idle down a little bit more, but you notice the choke's wide open now. It's still going to stumble some because the engine's not fully warmed up yet. So right here is the idle adjustment screw right here. And there's actually an adjustment on the fast idle. Factory calls for 1500 when it's ice cold, so that's where I got it set at. But anyway, it's ready to go now. It's ready to, I mean, you really you don't want to drive one of these old analog vehicles when it's fast idle, because it puts a whole lot of stress on your automatic transmission when you're idling, okay? I mean, you're holding it back, you're actually fighting against it. So it's always good with these old analogs to let them warm up. All right, so what I'm gonna do is shut this down, and I'm gonna show you on the 49, the starting procedure for it. Now, if this was a stock engine, a 235 or a 216 or even a 261, which would have been the engines of this era of truck, they would have, the 49 would have the manual choke. So this cable coming out here would come over to the right to the single one barrel in the middle, and it would control the choke. As you can see, these are progressive 2-barrel carburetors that normally came on the Ford Pinto and the Escort and some other, I think they're Holley Weber 5200s or 32 millimeter progressive 2-barrel carburetors, and they have the automatic choke. Okay, so that's why the knob is not utilized in my truck. If you notice, this is the primary barrel, that's the secondary. For some odd reason, they put a choke on the secondary too. It's crazy, but you normally will not find a carburetor with a choke on the secondary venturi or barrel. But this is also a Motorcraft 740, I believe, was the Motorcraft part number. But anyway, so they're linked together, so they open and close off the same choke. And in order to set these, now you can see from the last time I drove this, I drive this pretty regular, but it's been probably, let me see, what is this, Friday? Probably been Saturday. So it's been Saturday since I drove it. I may have to do some cranking on it to get the fuel bowl. Now, right here you can see the fuel bowl, and it's showing fuel in it, but that doesn't mean it hadn't evaporated out of the float bowls in here. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do it by hand instead of going in there and pressing the gas pedal. I'm going to set the chokes and squirt. I'm going to do it, since it's been almost a week, I'm going to do it 3 times, all right? 1. Notice the choke's closed, all right? Now, hopefully, I can look down there to see if I'm actually squirting any gas in there. I don't know if I did or not, and but I'm going to find out real soon. So now, I've got the choke set. The second carburetor is exactly like this. I've got them perfectly balanced. Well, as perfect as I could get them. And so we're sitting on the high idle cam, the choke's closed, and if there was fuel in the float bowl, it squirted the additional fuel in the venturi, so it should start. So let's see. Since I still have the foot starter, I've got to actually get in the cab to start this thing. So bear with me. Everything's ready to go. I'm just going to turn the ignition on, and let's see if it'll start. not unusual that it died that first time, okay? So if you noticed, after I started it again, I kicked it down about, what, a couple seconds later to get this smoother idle. Now it's still at a fast idle, and this engine's going to take longer than the Chevy to warm up. So we'll just have to wait. Now I'll show you the chokes. Now remember, these are automatic chokes, so there's 12 volts applied to the coils. And there's one on back there too, and it's heating up. Now notice the chokes. They're barely cracked. That's to allow it to idle, all right? I know from past experience, it's gonna take it a little while before it'll idle down. Now this has about 3 steps as far as the fast idle cam. So it's really fast, a little bit slower. Then now you notice it slowed down itself, because that cam, when the choke opens, it can force this. It can't, on the Quadrajet, it can't overcome the linkage. But for some reason, it can't overcome the linkage on 2 carburetors here. All right, I'm gonna see if I can kick it down a little bit more. That is not the normal idle, but that's the lowest step cam until it kicks off to the regular idle. Once warmed up, this will idle at about 600 RPM. It's at about 1,000 now. Now, if this engine was stock, it would idle normally between 400 and 500 RPM. But I've got a cam in it, a hotter cam, and at that low of an RPM, it's very lumpy, and it shakes a lot. And I know that turns a lot of people on, but I like my engine smooth. I feel it doesn't wear the bearings out, the main bearings and the rod bearings out, the smoother the engine runs. So I crank it up to about 600 to idle, so it's smoother. As you can see, the chokes are opening more. They notice? They're opening more. Although really this one is the one, the primary, this barrel really doesn't squirt any gas in until the front. See, it's a mechanical progressive, so at a certain point, when the linkage is open, it'll open the throttle plate on this. Normally at low speeds, only this side throttle plate opens. I get about 14 to 14.5 miles per gallon out of this setup, and I'm pretty happy with that. I don't complain about getting that. Now it may kick down more. I noticed the choke here is open more on its own. Now when I kick it, it'll take the tension off holding that choke, and it might allow it to go all the way open. If it does, it should idle down to 600. And there you go. That's its normal idle, about 600 RPM. And notice the chokes, they're wide open. Now this engine is still not fully warmed up, so it'll still stumble some, but it's fully drivable now. You just got to feather your clutch somewhat, and you'll be good to go. So anyway, you notice I didn't, well, I'll get back to it. I want to touch on one other important point about a carburetor, and that is clean fuel. As you can tell, I've got a good filter here in the fuel line feed to the carburetors, and also my fuel filter, my fuel pump, I'm sorry, has a screen to catch large stuff before it even gets to the filter. So I'm keeping the fuel as clean as possible to get into these carburetors. Now remember what I said about how the fuel is controlled in the float bowls. It's by a little pintle valve that goes up and down, which adjusts the fuel level in the float bowl via that little valve, allowing fuel in and out. One thing that can happen, you know, a piece of garbage can get through and get into that valve and not allow it to close, and it'll allow too much fuel, and what happens is the fuel will eventually overflow through the passages and get into the venturis, which will make it too rich, the whole mixture too rich. So you got to make sure that you keep the fuel clean. Conversely, a little piece of it's got to be small. Piece of garbage could get in there and it could actually clog up the little fuel inlet hole that the pintle valve controls and not allow fuel to get into the float bowl. So you want to keep it clean. And like I said, in this truck's case, I've got this filter here, then I've got the fuel filter. Now on the Vette, the fuel filter's actually built into the carburetor right here. And they're normally good for at least 5,000 miles, and so I don't worry too much. This particular Vette actually had some sort of a rubberized, what can I say? Sort of like aircraft, military aircraft, a rubberized sort of not balloon, but what's the word I'm looking for? In other words, instead of the fuel being in the metal fuel tank, it's in this rubber reservoir inside the fuel tank. So the rust cannot get from the fuel tank into this. So anyway, wanted to cover that. All right, there's one more method of choke control that I didn't touch on, and that's called sometimes referred to as a divorce choke. In other words, instead of it being electrical controlled or manual controlled, it uses the heat off the engine. Most times it's a exhaust crossover, or where the coil actually sits at a spot where the hot exhaust gases can heat up the coil, or it sits on a plenum that surrounds an exhaust manifold. It's wherever it can get hot air to circulate around that bimetal coil to heat it up in order to work the choke. Now, that 75 Corvette actually came from the factory with that divorce choke type setup, but it didn't, a previous owner along the way went to a later model aluminum intake that didn't utilize that, and they changed it over to an electric choke. Now, changing over to an electric choke is probably, unless you're wanting to stay as close to original as you possibly can, changing over to an electric choke will probably is more efficient and will work better for you than that older heat sourced choke, but or divorce choke. But or even a manual's not bad. A lot of racers go to a manual choke. They don't want all they don't need the drivability of in between idle and high speed. That you get in your mid range, that your choke will help you on a cold engine. They just want it to start and open it all the way up. And there's some people that has high performance engines, they don't even have chokes, all right? You just sit there and you squirt, 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 or you even prime. You actually take some fuel and pour it down the carburetor to get it to start when it's ice cold. But for our all intents and purposes, we're just talking about the three major types of chokes you'll run into, and that's manual, divorce choke, and electric. And again, this is really basic carburetor 101. The procedures I showed you is tried and true. I use it on everything. if you go to try to start an engine that hadn't started in years and years and years, well, you're probably going to end up having to pour gas down into the carburetor. But that's a whole other thing. That's a whole other situation, a whole other story. I do not recommend starting starting spray of any kind. I always believe in just squirting gas in. But sometimes if it's an old engine and it hadn't run in years and years, that's the only way you're going to get it to start. So anyway. So, hope that kind of covers some of your basic stuff. I've got videos on how to adjust the chokes, how to adjust the carburetors, how to rebuild a carburetor. If you just go through my library, you might be able to find them. If you got any comments or questions, just put them down there and I'll be glad to answer. So otherwise, that's a basic operation of the carbureted internal combustion engine on our classic truck and a classic car. And I hope you found it useful. So, hope everything's going good with you and yours. Everything's going great here. I can't complain. Won't do me no good to complain anyway. Just carry on and take care of that business. Have a good one, and I hope to see you around on the next one. See you.